A narrative is a story written time over time. Shine Africa podcast reviews works written by African writers. Welcome to the home of captivating literature talks. I am your host, Juliana Nthenya. So thank you so much, Madam Kripa Aiyar, for answering the call to be on this podcast today, Shine Africa. And I am so delighted to review your book, Bleeding with Pride. And I am excited to have you on this podcast. Kindly introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, what you're passionate about. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Juliana. It's a pleasure to be a part of this show. I understand and I appreciate the fact it took a little longer for us to decide, though we had decided that we are going to be on the podcast. But it actually, I should appreciate you for all the efforts that you took in and trying to be too patient enough to commit or to get connected, because obviously there's a time difference that we both have. Okay, coming back to introducing myself, as you know that I'm an author. So I'm an Indian Zambian based author who resides in Lusaka, the capital city of Zambia. I'm an author, a business administrator, and an advocate for women's transformation. I also focus on mental health coaching for now. So this is all about me. So my first book was actually launched in January 2024 this year. It actually says Her Unbroken Spirit, where it emphasizes more about women's empowerment and how important it is for a woman to take care of herself and give her some time. After that, I decided one fine day, this was something that I was passionate about. Okay, by the way, I used to like writing. So from grade 7, I had the habit of actually writing journals. Though, you know, when you're in school days, you're always caught by one of your parents and they want to check what you have scribbled and written in your book. So that journal was actually motivated me a lot to proceed further to write. The reason for me to get into writing was my mother. I mean, I would rather the first book was dedicated to her completely, because I saw how strong she was as a woman, and she never gave up in life, no matter how many difficulties she had to come across. So second book that was something that was launched is something very close to my heart, which says Bleeding with Pride, Your Comprehensive Menstrual Guide. This was launched this year actually, and the reason behind this was because I wanted to create an awareness amongst men and women, both the genders, because I feel menstrual health, it's a natural process that every girl child goes through, or every woman goes through, though obviously there are different age groups where teenage girls, how they feel when they have their first menstrual period. How does it affect the life of a woman who's in her mid-30s to 40s, and then women after that? So there are stages of menstruation, and at the end of the day, I felt unless and until if you're not going to speak about menstruation as a whole, it would not allow you to break the taboos, because everybody needs to know what menstruation is all about. And it's so sad to understand and know the fact that men do not know anything about menstruation, and it's always been a shunned topic, right? Because I believe, like, when you could speak about sex education openly, you should also try to consider speaking about menstruation and how men can contribute in helping. It's not necessarily has to be like they have to be with us, but they could actually go to a pharmacy, or they could go to a store and help you by getting some menstrual products for a woman or for a girl. So that's the book that we have launched, and we are actually on our way to try to take it in a new way, where I'm trying to have create the awareness programs on menstrual health, which would be actually helpful for a lot of women out in there, especially, I must say, like autistic children, autistic women, disabled children, and the women behind prison. So menstruation does not stop only with you and me. There's beyond to it, and if few factors and awareness are created, I'm sure everybody would look into it, and probably if not today, then after some years, it would be at a better place.
Wow, thank you so much. We'll just go straight to the point and look at what is menstruation. Now that you're talking about menstruation, and we can hear that it is linked with women, what is menstruation according to your own words?
So I feel it's just a natural biological process that you bleed every month. Obviously, very important factors that you also need to know that not every woman would bleed at the same time, the same month, and the flow varies from woman to woman. So if you ask me, a girl child, take an example of a girl child who's in a school, obviously her hormone levels are way too high, and when she has her period for the first time, she probably would bleed for say 5 days. Then looking into the woman in the 20s to 30s, that's when the woman is all very fertile, and then she might bleed for say 3 days or 4 days. And then the women who get into the perimenopause stage, where they are in their 40s and 50s, they probably would say bleed for 7 days, or some might have bleeding for 2 days, or some might not even have proper bleeding. Women who are in their menopause, that is something which is actually a little, I wouldn't call it as a worry, but a little challenging factor, because there's no limit for them to bleed in terms of the hormonal levels would actually aggravate in their body. Probably that would end up with their mood swings, that would affect that mental health. And this is it in term or in short for you, menstruation from my end.
Okay, thank you. Today we are looking at bleeding with pride. Why did you end up choosing the title Bleeding with Pride? You know, people can bleed and not bleed with pride. I'm looking at the word pride.
Okay. Coming back to your question, the topic which said bleeding with pride, or the title, because we women have been shunned in lot of ways, yeah, and obviously it's different. Yes, I don't know if, though you said like you are yet to read my book and you're reviewing my book, each cultures have different practices when it comes to menstruation. Okay, now if you ask me, it's like it depends from societies to societies as well. And when we talk about cultures, in my culture, yeah, Indian culture, I'm a Hindu, so in my culture probably we always had been told that you are not supposed to go near God, or you're supposed to stay alone for the 4 days when you bleed. Your plates are different, your glass is different, your spoon is different, and those days you were not treated equally. So now that everything is changing slowly, and the old traditions that we had, obviously there would have been some reason where women had this kind of a practice and tradition, but now things are changing. And it's not something to feel bad about, it's not something to feel ashamed about, because I know that if you happen to visit a drugstore, okay, let me give you an example that I had traveled to India last month, or every time when I travel to India, this is what I have noticed. And it's so sad to see, if you happen to visit a drugstore in India, okay, and you ask the person across the counter that I need some pads, you would not believe, Juliana, they wrap the pads for you and they give it to you in your hand. It's not a shun, it's not something that you should be ashamed about, right? You're a woman, and it's a biological process that takes place in your body where your hormones obviously trigger. So the progesterone levels and the estrogen levels are not in our control. So this is something we need to create an awareness where you should feel proud that you're bleeding. It's a normal process. I would rather say it's kind of like you're suppressing yourself, where you go to a drugstore, you're asking the person to give you pads, the person, and you're even requesting the person, because you tell the person to wrap it. So the person wraps for you in a newspaper and he gives it to you. So the reason this happens is because the male child, yeah, the boy is not being taught, or the boy is not being told in the homes that a girl bleeds. So what happens to her body when she bleeds? I think where there is a girl child being born in a family, and where there's a brother, where there's another male child, and when the boy grows seeing the sister, or the mother, or his aunt, I think you need to have open conversations around this, because the moment you start having conversations hidden, the male child wouldn't know, and that's why we lead into problems, you know. And I think that's how I felt like I am bleeding. I feel proud about myself, and that's the reason we got a title like Bleed with Pride, your comprehensive menstrual guide.
Oh, that's awesome. For your
Yeah.
case, it's all different here in Kenya. You go
Yeah.
to a store, maybe a shop, and you know the way they'll wrap the pads, and you'll actually wonder, is it a crime? And I remember
Exactly.
there's some days where I could not even purchase
Hmm.
pads when anybody is around me. I could actually wait for everybody to clear, And then I
Mm-hmm.
would tell the shopkeeper, I would point to him or her, that is what I need. And you
Mm-hmm.
see, I just feel like it's a moment where we should rise and create
Yes.
menstrual awareness. And that
Yes.
takes us to period poverty. Tell us
Yes.
about period poverty.
Ending period poverty, I think the first thing which I have noticed and which I have experienced, it's like there has to be the education and awareness kind of a program regarding period poverty. I understand there are a lot of organizations nowadays who come forward, who donate pads. They kind of like have a donating pad campaign, and they kind of do a lot during the menstrual hygiene day every year that takes place in the month of May. But who is going forward to the community centers and who is actually explaining it to them how to use a pad? Most of the women out in there, you won't believe, I think 95% of women do not know how to stick a pad to their underwear. Yes, I'm sure, right? Yes, this is something that I wanted to share, which I was very eager for. So it's like every time I know we all use pads and there is different ways. So when you open the pad, you try to stick it to your underwear, right? And it's stuck
Yes,
both. But that's a wrong practice, Juliana. So when you open a pad, you're supposed to stick the joints of the pad together, so the pad joins together. That's how you're supposed to stick. So it's an awareness where we go and tell people this is how you use your pad. And it's like, take an example of community schools. Girls are not aware, they do not know what period poverty is. How are we going to cope up period poverty? Many of them I know, say like where I come from, where we live in Zambia, we have some places called in compounds where it's like people have been staying there for a longer time. Obviously people who come from the low class, they stay there. And for a surprise, and it's so sorry to see that most of them use, you call it as cotton, because they say they cannot access pads. So when you cannot access pads, obviously it's going to be very difficult for them. How much are you going to use cotton? Obviously there has to be a limit. How much are you going to use a cloth? Because you're not sure about the flow that a girl or a woman is going to have. And for a surprise, if you see, I'll tell you, I mean, I did not visit prison, but I kind of like try to manage to get information from there. Women in prison, okay, say I might say 90% of women in prison here, they kind of use shrugs. When I say they use shrugs, imagine it is so bad. First of all, the shrugs are not washed. You cannot wash because there is no water and sanitation. Secondly, you cannot use the same shrug because you're going to kind of have urinary tract infection. And obviously, you're going to have boils around your vagina. So, unless and until if you're not going to help them give pads, now again, it's like how many pads are you going to give it to them? Imagine if you have, say, a matron, or I must say, someone who takes care of the prison. If it's a woman, it's easier to deal with her. But imagine if there's a man who is on his duty and a woman is going and asking him pads, and he is completely not aware of what pads are. Look at the situation, how it turns into. So I think awareness is very important that we need to create. I understand, and I am happy like people have come up way forward where we talk about ending period poverty, but no one is touching kind of what ending period poverty is and how we can help to end period poverty. There are a lot of factors that we need to consider. Say some like, we can improve sanitation facilities, which can definitely be done. We can have an access to menstrual products, because if you have access, then it kind of like works with the subsidiary where the government can also shine in, where the government can also help. I know government is helping, but it is something that cannot happen in 24 hours. It's a long process, yeah. So it definitely would take time, but if everybody comes forward to do a good cause, then obviously yes. I'll also mention this: in Zambia we have a district called as Monzi district. When I was writing my book, I had to do a research before I could write, because I did not want to share wrong information. So if you look there, a lot of girls are given birth control pills for a surprise. The reason, because they shouldn't bleed. The mothers take them to the centers, clinic centers, and they have been given birth control injections. You know what happens when you give a birth control injections, right? Your fertility cycle messes up completely, and they kind of like have no access for water. So when they do not have access for water, the mothers kind of dig, a small, they dig a place where the girl is allowed to bleed. The moment she finishes bleeding, the mother's put on top. So when you see people suffering like this, obviously there is no awareness, and I feel together we can do a lot. And this is just a beginning. There's a long way to go. I happened to visit one of the special needs children's school here in Zambia, and it's like they are somewhere around 300 to 500 girls. And when you talk about disabled, when you talk about Down syndrome, the girls are unaware of what needs to be done. And it's so painful to see them, because you need to have somebody, and most of the girls are dumb and deaf. Imagine the scenario, where are they going to go and tell people? You cannot have a dumb and deaf interpreter at your place, right? It's beyond
Yeah.
impossible. So yeah, and it's like when you look at them, you feel sorry about it. But now that they're coming forward, the schools are actually welcoming each and everybody. The schools are welcoming the NGOs, schools are welcoming the foundation who could come and create awareness programs. I am sure somewhere down the line things will get better, and things can get better. The only issue is like we are not talking about it. The problem, it's like breaking taboos. That's what my book actually says. The problem, it's like we are not talking about it. So the time, if we are not going to talk about it, it's always going to be behind. And when you don't talk about a subject, it's very difficult, So I hope this awareness campaigns can help a lot of women, a lot of girls out in there, and we all can end period poverty together.
Whew, that is a lot. I am actually
All right.
astonished to hear
Uh-huh.
that. Even when I thought of menstrual awareness, now that I am able to purchase pads, I am able to uh, purchase water and keep myself in a good condition. I have never thought of those who are in prison and
Yes.
the physically challenged people. Oh my God, we need to do things out here. And that takes us to taboos. How can we break these taboos around the menstrual period talks?
I think it's very important, Juliana, especially when we speak about gender equality these days. Yeah, I I don't know how does it work in Kenya, but in Zambia it's like we have something called as one Mother's Day a month. So if I'm bleeding, if I'm on my periods, obviously, right, I might not have cramps, you might have cramps, you might not have cramps, somebody else is in pain, and I see a lot of women in pain actually. So the government has given us to take 1 day Mother's Day off. Yes, when we say 1 day Mother's Day off, it's like if you have your periods, if you're unable to come, you can inform them, you can take your leave. That is something we are very happy with. But look into many of the organizations, yeah, the organizations that I have visited, the organizations that I have worked with for so many years. Men kind of shun off with this topic, okay, and it's like lot of the washrooms, especially, there's something that I actually wanted to speak about, and the discussion is kind of like getting a little more interesting. Imagine the washrooms, yeah. I It's like when I worked for a few organizations, there were no pads kept in the washroom. If I tell my boss I'm not well, I have period cramps, he would just look at me and he would say, "Oh, it's just a stomach ache, right? You're going to be okay. Take a Panadol." People have to know. You have to support your colleague. You have to help them do things. Imagine if someone is bleeding profusely and there are no pads. At least a man can rush to a drugstore and get a pad for the lady, right? So I
Yeah.
think this is something very important, because when we talk about gender equality, this falls in place. And for a surprise, I travel a lot, okay? And every time when I travel, one thing I have to do, it's like always carry my pads. And the worst part is whenever I travel, I get my periods. So my travel from Zambia to India, it takes me somewhere around 9 to 10 hours, okay? I find it very difficult to kind of like pass urination
in the aircraft. The reason because the aircraft is too tiny. You cannot change your pad. You're very uncomfortable. All that you have to do is like you have to wait when you get into the transit. Now again, there's a queue for your toilet. Toilets do not have pads. So these are the factors where we could actually go forward and help, by keeping pads, by distributing pads. And the other thing, it's like in market these days you have all kind of menstrual products. And I'm someone who was very accustomed to pads. So obviously we know that if we use pads, you're going to have rashes around your vagina. And it's very common with all the women out in there, all the girls. So I moved to the reusable pads that I used to use. I think I have used it for say 7 years now. So the best part of reusable pad is like I can afford a reusable pad. Yeah. When I say I can afford a reusable pad, the pad would cost me, say, probably, say, $5, or the pad would cost me, say, $10. But I have the facility to wash the pad, to sanitize it, to dry it completely, reuse it next month. But imagine girls who cannot do that. And there are a lot of menstrual products that I actually noticed, like some use tampons, some use menstrual cup. And for a surprise, menstrual cup comes in three different age wise. Menstrual cup is something that I was actually doing a research, and I found out that if you do not know how to use a menstrual cup, you might end up having toxic shock syndrome, TSS. And when you have this shock syndrome, you are going to find difficulties, or you're going to have difficulties in passing urine. So there are a lot of products that we have, but there has to be an awareness created of how to use a product. I'm not comfortable with tampons, Juliana, and I seriously don't know how does that work, and I don't even want to go there. I'm not comfortable with the menstrual cup because I do not know will that fit my vagina. So just because people are saying, okay, menstrual cup is good for you, but the first thing that I would advise every girl and woman is like, please check the product before you buy. Try to look into the instructions. Is that going to be advisable and suitable for you, right? Just because it's available, it should also suit our health. So I think that's very important. And coming back to the gender equality that we were talking about actually a few minutes before, it's very important for every man to know. It's very important for every brother to know. It's very important for every husband to know what a woman goes through. I don't know how is it with you, but with me, I'll tell you. When I'm about to have my PMS, yeah, premenstrual syndrome, when I'm about to get my menstruation, and when I have this PMS period, I become crazy. When I say I become crazy, the first thing that hits my health is my mood swings. And when it hits my mood swings, that's when we kind of like, have unnecessary thoughts coming over your mind. The second thing is like your sleep pattern takes a toll. The third thing is like you crave for all different things that you must have not eaten. So these are the factors that a man can contribute in supporting the partner, or probably a brother can contribute supporting the sister, and they should also understand it's a normal process that takes.
Oh, thank you. This topic is getting interesting
Oh,
minute after minute.
Yes, yes, yes.
I'm
It's so.
actually wondering,
Uh-huh.
will this conversation really end?
I doubt, but we have to end it.
Okay, so I want you to talk a little bit about menstrual cycle.
Okay.
One of my audiences was like, "Wait, Juliana, make sure you talk about the cycle. I want to when I'll be having kids, I want to know what to do. I want to know, he is very anxious about this, and this is for him."
So obviously, okay, I would not want to go deep into the process of the cycle, but I think it's very important for a man to understand, like when you're menstruating, yeah, as I mentioned a few minutes before when we began the conversation and our chat, the cycles are completely different. So I think the first thing I would like to tell you, Juliana, please ask him to get a copy of my book. He will find everything what the stages and cycles are all about. Okay. So we have a follicular phase out in here. So, something which is very important. We as a woman, we know that we ovulate, right? Before our periods. So a week before we kind of like ovulate, Yes, and when we ovulate, it means it's time for us. We are on the fertile window. So when we say we are on the fertile window, the chances of being pregnant or the chances of getting pregnant is very high for women during that time. After periods, it's like you have to wait because many of them bleed once they stop periods. So I would suggest, like, if somebody wants to know or the person is really interested, then they actually have to follow the follicular phase. And the best part, it's like you have to eat healthy because obviously we kind of like are so accustomed with the sedentary lifestyle. Stress plays a major factor for a woman because a woman kind of like plays different roles, right? She has to keep up her roles everywhere she goes. So for a woman, probably say if this month she's trying to get pregnant, yeah, and if it's not happening, that could be due to a lot of stress factors that she's getting into. But the best advice that I could give, it's like eat healthy food, try to kind of like prepare or try to kind of like plan to have a child during your fertile days. It's much important, and especially when you're ovulating.
Thank you. There's much more to be discussed about menstrual health, about menstruation. And that is why I'm excited to tell our audiences and listeners that Crown of Glory, that is Juliana Nthenya, is beginning an initiative about menstrual awareness, and with the help of my guest, and I am so excited. So we are promising to bring you a live webinar in next month, and I am very sure that all those answers, you'll get all those answers, and all those questions will be answered day in, day out. And I urge you to join us in that journey because it will be a lifelong journey. We will walk together in prisons. That's my prayer. We'll go to those people who are physically challenged and mentally challenged. Also, I am seeing ourselves walking to different nations and doing this. And I am excited of what this conversation has brought forth or what has been birthed from this conversation. Thank you so much, Madam Kripa. I am excited. There's much more that we can talk about. There's much more that we can discuss, but due to time, we can just tell our audience to see us next in our live webinar in next month. Meanwhile, you can give us a parting shot.
It's Juliana, as you mentioned a few minutes before, like with the time, and this is so sensitive topic, we could keep talking the whole day, but looking into time, as Juliana mentioned, like definitely menstrual health is a vast topic, and we would have we would rather conduct a live webinar where our audiences could come and ask questions, definitely. And we would really be glad to have a lot of participants because this is supposed to be an ongoing awareness throughout our life. This is not something that we could speak about and then we shun it off. I would be very happy to be a part of this journey with Juliana. And we look forward to kind of like try to accommodate a lot of them whenever and wherever possible, definitely, yes. And we would also see how we could kind of like try to have more of awareness campaigns together, me and Juliana, definitely, which will be helpful to each and everybody out in there. And at the end of the day, we always say like to share is to care. So if you care for somebody, try to share the pieces of advice that we get. Obviously, we are also on the learning stage and we are not perfectionists, but definitely we are here to help you all. So we are looking forward, as Juliana mentioned, we are looking forward for the live webinar. We are happy to have you all on board. And I would share the details of my book. It's available on Amazon. So Juliana would help you all to share the link. And my request to each one of you who's listening to this podcast is like, please, if possible, try to grab a copy. It would really help. If you think you have somebody's birthday, say like your wife's, your mother's, your girlfriend's birthday, please give them a copy and make them feel special. And a request, it's like, speak about menstruation openly, and it's always healthy. And for the women out in there, it's like you have to bleed with pride and be happy always. Thank you, Juliana.
Oh, thank you. And the last thing, kindly tell us where we can follow you on your social media, on the social media platforms.
Okay, great. I am accessible on Facebook. I am accessible on Instagram. I have my account on LinkedIn. I also have my WhatsApp number and my email address in case if you feel you shy away to come forward for the live webinar. Juliana would share all the details out in there. You can find me on the social media platform. If you think you can't, Juliana would definitely help you to find me, and then we take it further.